Hi, and welcome to Lessons with Cameron. Today we're going to take a look at the Orange Tiny Terror 112 combo amplifier. This thing is a 15 watt powerhouse and it's pretty darn awesome. So let's talk a little bit about what this thing is and what it's all about. The Orange Company got its start in London in 1968 by a guy named Clifford Cooper, who started this British amplifier company that is today got some artists on its roster as notable as Jimmy Page, Jim Root from Slipknot, and Chino and Sergio of the Deftones, giving a shout out to our local bands here. So let's get to the nuts and the bolts of this great little machine. So the Orange Tiny Terror is loaded with a Celestion G12H30 70th anniversary speaker. This is a great little sounding speaker, and I'm really pleased that that's what they chose to put in there. One of the unique features of the Orange Tiny Terror is the fact that it only has 3 knobs for control: a volume, a gain, and a tone knob. And the tone knob simply is going to roll on and off those high and low frequencies, which allows you to get a kind of a muddier tone or a really bright, punchy tone. Most players tend to agree that we like that tone knob somewhere in that 10 o'clock all the way maybe up to 12 o'clock range, but any more than that and it starts to get really punchy. The Tiny Terror has a 2-stage gain, which makes it kind of an interesting amp because as you roll on the gain, it starts to really change colors, giving you a lot more options than you think you would get with just 3 knobs. So let's go ahead and make some noise with the Tiny Terror and see what sounds we can dial out. We're going to go through a couple of the different setting options and let you hear what this thing can do. The first thing we're going to do is go ahead and run through a clean setting that I've been using for a while, and whenever I'm working at home or at work and I want to keep the volumes down, this is a pretty good middle-of-the-road tone, and here is a sampling of the sound. Now here's some chords. Alright, so let's go ahead and turn some knobs and see what we get. Alright, so now we've got the volume at 9 o'clock, we've got the tone knob at 12 o'clock because we haven't messed with the tone yet, and we're going to go back and do that at the end, and then we've got the gain knob at about the 10 o'clock position. This is a nice, mildly dirty tone, but still remnants of clean. And here we go. Alright, so now we've got the gain knob turned up about 2/3 away, maybe the 2 o'clock position. Everything else is pretty much the same. Let's give this guy a listen. It's got a lot more bite and a lot more attack. You could really hear the second stage of that preamp coming to life here. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and turn the gain all the way up to about 3:30, 4 o'clock position there. We've almost got it maxed out. You're going to find that when we get the gain up there, this becomes a noisy little monster. So let's give it a listen. There it is. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and we're going to take the tone knob, and we're going to have that tone knob, while I play some chords, we're going to have that tone knob slowly turn its way from all the way down to all the way up, so that you can hear what the tone knob does to your tone, because it's kind of a vague description of a knob tone, right? So here it is, all the way down to all the way up. As you can see, by the time we got done, it was really, really bright. It's usually a little too bright for performance purposes. All the way down was probably a little too dull for performance purposes, but boy, that thing sounds great between 10 and 2. You just don't want to push it too far in either direction, I'd imagine. But then again, it's there. If you really like what it sounds like, then do it. Alright, the last thing we want to do in this demonstration is run some pedals through this thing, because a lot of people want to know what it sounds like with a pedal on it. I did watch a lot of reviews on this amp, and that's the one thing I guess that gets left out a lot, is since it doesn't have an effects loop, what would it sound like with some pedals? So let's give it a listen. I've got my pedal board hooked up. I haven't been using any of them yet, but I'm going to go ahead and add my noise suppressor, and let's start with some gain. So this is the orange set with the amp's gain fairly low and the volume set up pretty decently high. We want to put the tone knob right about the 10 o'clock position, and let's give it a listen with some gain from a full tone plimsoll. The full tone plimsoll is set with the level just under 12 o'clock. The sustain is set at the 2 o'clock position, and the high cut is just over the 12 o'clock, and the stage 2 gain is turned up pretty high. So here we go, let's give it a listen. Now I'm going to go ahead and add some chorus. Let's give it a listen with the chorus. The chorus we have going on today is the Danelectro Cool Cat. It's got the speed dialed mostly down, almost all the way to the bottom, and the chill, which I'm pretty sure is depth, is right about the 11 o'clock position. So this is with just chorus. So it's got a little bit of bite to it still, and that's the one thing I noticed with this orange, is it's always got a little bit of bite to it. So I'm going to go ahead and add some reverb. Now the reverb is the tricky one, because as you add more and more gain on the orange amp, it's going to start distorting the signal going in. Without an effects loop, that means that your reverb is going in before the gain. So the distortion is going to be applied not just to your guitar sound, but also to the reverb and any other effects you add. It'll distort the reverb, creating this kind of terrible echoey noise. So you can't use too much gain when you're using pedals, essentially. And this is going to limit how loud you can get this thing, which I'll cover in my summary of this thing at the end. So here's the sound. We're going to add some distortion, or first some reverb, then we'll do some distortion and reverb. So reverb. This is the Electro Harmonics Holy Grail Plus. I've got it set to the Hall setting with the blend and the amount knobs about halfway, just a little under the 12 o'clock position. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and add some distortion to this, distortion and reverb, and see what we can come up with. Alright, so as you can see, the amp does work really well with pedals, but you're going to get some limitations on volume. Now, if you have a tendency to play shows where you're using large stages with PAs and you guys are running microphones into the amps, then you are absolutely set with the Tiny Terror. I have used this amp on the largest outdoor stage in America up at the Buffalo Chip in Sturgis, and this Tiny Terror could be heard for probably about 2 or 3 towns over. So if they're micing it, it's not that big of a deal how loud your amp gets. Now, if they're not micing it and you're in an outdoor event, this amp may not do it for you. I had this thing at an outdoor event one time, and I had the volume and the gain turned all the way up to 10, and no one could hear me. My singer kept leaning over to me telling me to turn it up, and I was like, it's already turned all the way up, man. So that is one thing to consider. You'll need more horsepower for an outdoor event, especially if it's a large event. In an indoor setting, you still got to push this thing pretty hard sometimes if the band is real loud. So I've noticed with bands that are real relaxed in their volume, I have a tendency to be able to keep up all day with this Orange Tiny Terror. If you get in there with a hard-hitting drummer, a heavy thumping bass player, and a really loud guitar player, well, this thing just gets swallowed up. It just doesn't, 15 watts just doesn't cut it. So up next to a Marshall half stack, sure, it's not going to hold its own, but I would put this up against any 15 watt amp out there. So real happy with it. Great amp that does have its shortcomings, but other than that, it's a great little amp. All right, so now I'm going to talk about the strengths and the weaknesses of this thing and kind of try to sum up this amp. The obvious strengths of this amp are tone. It's got tone for days. Its tone's just built into this thing. Adding pedals is just going to augment that awesome, awesome tone. It definitely sounds a little bit different than most amps, so it's Orange Tiny Terrors. I think you can pick them out with your ear if you really listen for them. The strengths of this amp, again, it's all tone, 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 tone. 7 watts, 15 watts, those are really advantageous to have. The ability to switch from a loud or to a quieter setting. But other than that, it's just tone. So because it's such a simple amp, not many strengths, not many weaknesses. The biggest weakness I find with this amp, besides its overall volume level, which again, it's a 15 watt amp, so I knew that going in, would be the lack of an effects loop and the lack of reverb. Now, if you don't have an effects loop, that's fine. I can live without my effects, but I really like having a little bit of reverb to weten up my signal, because when the guitar is too clean, it can just be just too clean. It's hard to describe, but boy, you miss it when you don't have it. So if I had reverb, I don't need an effects loop. I can live. But if I have an effects loop, I don't need reverb. I can live because I can bring the reverb from my pedal board. But if you're going to take away my reverb and my effects loop, well, then you just take away my reverb altogether, and you leave me without any option of having it myself at a high gain setting. So ultimately, strengths, great tone. Weaknesses, no effects loop, no reverb. At lower levels, though, you can get by with it. So there's my 2 cents. I'd give this thing about an 8 out of 10. If it gave me reverb, I might give it a 9 out of 10. And if they just squeezed 5 or 10 more watts in there, that'd be a 10 out of 10. So this is a great amp to have. Highly recommend it. Make sure you stay tuned for some of our other videos. We got a Micro Terror video coming up, too. I'm going to look at the Tiny Terror's tinier brother. So until next time.